Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of My Dog Will Eat My Face. In this episode, I plan to actually touch on a relatively simple topic that I don't think will even take an entire episode. I think it's something so mundane and so ubiquitous, and there's so much agreement amongst us persons that it will fly by before you know we've even started, to be honest with you. Because my topic today is crushing fear. Yes. My topic today is literally fear. And why do I bring this up today? It's because I don't think that there's anyone who is alive now in 2021, or anyone who's like me and dying now in 2021, who's not acutely aware of the various fears and the various problems the world is facing, and the reactions, the visceral reactions that people are bringing against these fears. And of course, I adjusted in the beginning. No, this will not take a short amount of time. I apologize for lying to you right off the bat. This might be a somewhat deeper topic because, yes, I do plan on discussing fear. And no, that is not a simple topic. Although it is something that it's not always bad. People usually approach fear as a bad thing. And I'll say right away, fear is not always a bad thing. Oftentimes it's a good thing. It reminds me of the times when I was a child, when I was maybe between the ages of 10 and 13, when I was a preteen up to 13. I would go for hikes up into the mountains near my home, up in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where I would just go up there by myself, just to get my head cleared, just to throw rocks at hornets' nests. You know, do stupid little boy stuff that, otherwise any other little boy might do. Climb rocks, nothing special, climb a tree. Hey, do outdoor stuff. I know, this is going way back where I didn't have the Atari at home yet, so that will tell you how far back this goes. But yes, I said Atari. Yes, that far back. Not even the Nintendo yet. I did then get a Nintendo though, so don't worry. You don't need to report me to child services. I did then get a Nintendo, so I did move up in the world, so it's okay. I'm not an abused child. Anyway, so when I went on these excursions, up these hills and up these mountains, you bet your butt I was afraid. And I was afraid specifically of cougars, of mountain lions as they were. Why? Because there were mountain lion warnings all over the paths, all over the walkways. There were things that told you what to do to avoid a mountain lion, and what to do if you encounter a mountain lion, and what to do if a mountain lion attacks you. And so I would walk along, and I would be very cognizant of them. I would make a lot of noise to prevent myself from startling a cougar. I know that's a big no-no. You don't want to startle them. And also to be attention. Wow. I can't talk today. Be aware of your surroundings and to give them attention. Be able to look to your left and your right and your behind quickly and kind of cognizant of your surroundings. You don't just want to be a complete idiot. Don't walk with a small dog or a small baby, even worse. And there were many times when I was out walking along these paths where I could be walking by a ditch or a small creek, and it'd be completely overfilled with branches and twigs and debris from the forest, and you couldn't even see the water. You could probably hear it, but you couldn't even see the water as it trickled underneath all these twigs and overgrowth. And I absolutely would promise you that as I walked by little old me by myself, a 10-year-old child, there were times when a cougar or a mountain lion sat there in that perfect undergrowth environment, like they like to chillax in and watch their prey and to stalk them and to monitor their world. I absolutely guarantee you a cougar or two or more saw me and stalked me as I walked along those paths. I absolutely guarantee it, and I just didn't know it. They avoid people for the most part, even an easy, yummy meal meat like me. 60-pound kid walking up the path. They still generally wouldn't interfere too much unless they were really hungry. But I guarantee you they watched me and they stalked me. And I guarantee you that I was terrified of that fact. And that's why I was so lucid and so aware of my surroundings. That's why I was looking left and right and behind me all the time. And why I did read every sign and what to do if you encounter one. And what to do if, God help you, you are attacked by one. And so in some cases, fear is good. Fear is something that keeps you alive. In this case, I was petrified and just riddled with fear. But it didn't necessarily always stop me on my trip. Now, there are many times where I felt like I was in a location where it was just way too sketchy. And my funny bone told me, okay, I need to back out of this environment as quickly as possible. This is way too dangerous. There's no one for miles. No one would hear me scream. I'm just surrounded with sagebrush and covered creeks and areas where a predator could hide. I'm backing out. And I'm sure there were many times when I did back out slowly of those areas where there was indeed a predator there watching me back out. So in those cases, and in many other cases, fear, I assure you, is a good thing. It keeps you alive, like I said. So the fear I'm speaking of are really three specific things. Even though they themselves are well-founded, the three things I want to discuss today are fear of being sick, fear of violence, and finally, lastly, fear of death. Those are some pretty big topics. So this might take a little bit to cover these topics, and I apologize if it does. But be that as it may, I wish to discuss those three topics because anyone who lives in 2021 or anyone who is dying in 2021 like I am is well aware of what our world is like, and it is riddled with fear. And in particular, I pull out those three things as the highest fears that I see around me: sickness, violence, and death. Now, to overcome, or not to overcome, but to react to those fears, in many cases, all you can do is provide a click. A lot of it's just clickbait. We know this. It's in the news. Click here, read this scary news article. And thankfully, that's mostly how we handle it. But I'm seeing things that are much more egregious in how they can impact a human being and how they handle their fear. I see people who are paralyzed, who are just completely neutralized and unable to react, unable to travel, unable to experience life. They go into isolation. They even destroy part of their lives voluntarily just to get away, or even to mitigate, not even to eliminate, just to mitigate those fears. And for me, it's just not worth it. And that's why I want to approach it today. Now, before I continue, I've got to say this again. This podcast is not a political podcast. There's going to be a lot of topics here that I'm sure that will sound political, or they are things that have been made political for reasons unknown to me and reasons I don't understand, and I'm going to tell you if I don't understand why they're political. But certainly there's going to be some folks who listen to this who will get triggered in a political sense and say, rah, rah, how dare you, blah, blah, blah is political, and you're clearly now on the other side, and we hate you, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, something like that. That will probably happen. But if that happens to you, my best advice is stop. Remind yourself, 1, this is not a political podcast. 2, this is a personal journal podcast. 3, this is my personal journal podcast. So if I share with you what I came to as one of my conclusions is how to handle these fears that I see all around us, it is my conclusion of how to handle these fears of all around us. And in case you don't know who I am just a lowly podcaster. I am not the President of the United States. I am not Vladimir Putin in some weird voice disguise. I am not anyone of any importance whatsoever, so my opinion, frankly, doesn't matter. So calm down. That is my advice. And just listen. Because if you find yourself being paralyzed, if you find yourself being isolated, if you find yourself self-destructive in your life to merely mitigate these fears, then I encourage you to at least listen to why I came to the decisions I came to, and why I have decided that the trade-off of doing those terrible things to oneself are simply not worth it to mitigate the fears we have today. So, with that said, we can now begin. Here we start. And hang on to your butts, because here we go. So beginning with number 1 of this podcast is people are now afraid of, well, sickness. This is nothing, of course, new. But people, it seems to me, are more afraid now, more than ever, of sickness. They are a form of disease. And, oh, God bless it. See, I'm at home, tied up to home oxygen, and sometimes it goes wrong, so just give me a minute. Hold on here. It. Okay. Where was I? I think I fixed it. I'll just cut that out later. Okay, starting over. People nowadays are afraid of being sick. They are afraid of disease more than in any other time of world history, as best as I can tell. Bear with me, I'm a little out of breath here. Nowadays, it blows my mind. I've got several friends here that are like me. We all have iPhones. Nothing unusual about that, of course. But the iPhone now, the new iOS, I don't know if you know this, has an application that allows you to detect COVID and report you happily to your local state government if you are at threat of getting COVID. Just within the last few weeks, I've had 3 friends of mine get alerts from the state government saying that they need to go immediately into, what do you call it? Isolation. What's the better word for isolate? I can't think of it right now. Quarantine. They have to go into quarantine. Because why? They came within 8 feet of someone else who might have COVID. That's it. And that could happen anywhere. It could be someone at a restaurant. It could be at a bar. It could be on a bus. It could be on a park bench. It could be on the street. It could be in a coffee shop. It could be in an elevator. It could be anywhere you could possibly imagine. And all 3 of my friends had to go through a big scare and go get COVID tested and report that to the state to basically be released from quarantine. And this is just an app on the phone. This comes with the phone. And that's a level of fear I've never seen before. I've never seen a kind of fear like that, to be honest, where someone goes into that kind of isolation or may go into that isolation. And if not, stampede for a COVID test to prove otherwise. And of course, when this happened with all 3 of my friends, all 3 COVID tests came back negative. And my question is, so what if it was? Is the trade-off really worth it? To me, remaining at home or being covered like a beekeeper in public, limiting your ability to enjoy a restaurant or travel, or other people's smiles. I mean, this is an honest question, honest to God question, and I hope some listeners can answer this for me, because I'm isolated here. I don't really go outside the apartment because of my illness. But how are people hooking up nowadays? Seriously, I really wonder that. How are people meeting each other and saying, yeah, let's go over to your place for coffee? How does that happen when you can't even see the person? I seriously wonder that. Now, in my personal case, I have never ever worn a mask. I do have a medical exemption composed by my doctors that permits me to bypass mask requirements. So that's true. I do have the medical exemption. Again, my situation is different. But I say that even if I didn't have that medical exemption, I still wouldn't wear a mask. I don't think the trade-off is worth it. I would still want to enjoy my meal and not take off a mask every sip, every bite. I want to go to a bar or a coffee shop and be able to enjoy it. Again, not having to drop a mask every sip. I want to be able to go out in public and smile at a person walking the opposite direction and see if they're smiling back at me. I mean, this is part of the human experience. This has been my part of the human experience on multiple continents. It enrages me that people are willing to give that simple thing up. And I don't understand for the life of me how covering up with masks has become the political theater it has. For me, it's apolitical. I know every listener is going to have a political stint on this. I am apolitical with this. And in my mind, if someone wants to wear a mask to protect themselves or others, I don't care. That's fine. You know, for many years, I mentioned my travel, and I mention it again. When I traveled to the Far East, wearing a mask in public was actually the norm well before COVID. I remember Japan and the Far East and Shanghai and Beijing were very similar. Singapore was similar. People would wear masks just when they had a cold. And it was a way not to just to keep others from getting sick, but it was a way to also to signal to others that, hey, I'm sick. You're in these super crowded situations. If you ever get on the metro in Tokyo or the tram or the metro in Shanghai, you're in these incredibly crowded areas. And so if you have a mask saying to everyone else, yo, I've got a little bug, it's a clue to them to stay away. And it's the polite thing to do. That's how they saw, and that's how it was explained to me literally at that time in those countries. And I couldn't argue with that. If you want to be polite and want to signal to others, hey, I do feel kind of crappy, I don't want to make you sick, so you probably want to stay away and use it for that kind of communication. By all means, I don't have any issue with that. My issue is when I see people walking down the street 100 yards from the nearest human being and they're covered up like a beekeeper. And I'm just thinking, what are they so afraid of? What in God's name could they be so afraid of? And of course, in our world today, it is different. Of course, people are sick. Of course, people are dying. I understand this. And none of this should be besmirched. People will always be sick and will always be dying, though. And it will ebb and flow, up and down. Disease is like a cruel river from Hades itself. It is the very bane of mankind for certainty. But alas, it's never ever going away. Especially a lot of the viruses, we all know. They mutate and grow. They're resilient little buggers. So again, why is now so different to give up so much of your life? Just because of this one fear of sickness. And of course, I don't want people to come at us thinking, oh, well, he's never been sick. He doesn't know. Oh, au contraire, frère. Of course I've had my fair share of being sick. Since 18, I've landed in ICU. I've landed in ICU religiously every year, actually, since 18, with pneumonia. At least once a year, usually more than once a year. And I've had my fair share of ventilators as well. I'm thinking about this as I go down the line. I know I've been on at least 2 to 3 ventilators. 3 ventilators. That you don't really forget them. I shouldn't have said 2 to 3. It's 3 ventilators I've been on. Yeah, you don't really forget them, especially when you wake up and you're on one. That's terrifying, and your arms are tied down so you don't yank it out. Yeah, I've been there. I've done that. I got the stained t-shirt. I've had my parents call to my bedside. I've had a priest read me my last rites. I've collapsed many times. I've given up driving because my heart stops and I faint now. I go down wherever I may be. And so, of course, once I had to call 911 when I came to on the floor in a pool of my own blood. Recently, relatively recently, within the last couple of years. And I completely opened my skull, apparently, on the granite countertop in my kitchen because I fainted and smashed my head right on the countertop. And I'll tell you, boy, those are really pretty countertops. The granite, they're beautiful. But boy, do they hurt, and they're not pleasant when your head lands with the full weight of your body behind it to just offer a nice loud crack to your head before you go further down another 4 or 5 feet to the floor. I still and will forever have a scarred head from that one event. And right now I can feel it. I can feel the huge long lumps where the skull had to heal beneath my hair. Thank God I'm not bald yet. I hope I'm not going to turn into a baldy because there's just going to be this weird gnarly lump like I don't even know what, maybe a gladiator or something. I don't know. So I have my bona fides, so to say, of illness and suffering from near death. I've never lived in this kind of fear, though, which is what I don't understand. In fact, my brother, my oldest brother, he said it best once. One time I was in the emergency room because I had an oxygen rate of about 68%. With a pneumonia, I was not doing very well. He was there, and my parents were there. Pretty much the whole family had arrived at that point. And while I was cranking away on tons of oxygen and about to buy the ventilator, they took my blood pressure, and it came back normal, on the low end of normal. It always does. I've never had high blood pressure in my life. I'm lucky. And it's always come back on the lower end of normal. And so, naturally, every other time, it came back on the lower end of normal. And so my brother, my oldest brother, in his perpetual brilliance, he said, "Well, Joe, you might be dying, but at least you're relaxed about it." I kind of said it better myself. So thank you, brother. Yes, at least I was relaxed about it. Anyway, so of course I understand the fear of disease and protecting others. And doing that is worthy of applause. Protecting others is worthy of applause. But paralyzing and isolating yourself in fear, to me, again, this is my opinion, no one else's, to me, it is just too high of a cost. I could never do that. And that's why it's been my very own decision to not wear a mask. Or to not cover myself up from disease. And to still go out and to still see the world if I can. I'm sure many will disagree. But alas, this is where I stand when it comes to this topic. Moving along, I wish to discuss fear of violence. Now, the building in which I currently live is probably more secure right now than the, Israeli embassy might be my first guess. Secondly, it might be up there with Lubyanka in Moscow. Yeah, maybe I should use that as a comparison. The building in which I live is as secure as Lubyanka itself. The reason why I say this is that, well, I've been to many embassies around the world in my travels, especially U.S. embassies, of course. And the procedures and security that my home currently has are basically is equivalent to what I experienced in those embassies. Things such as armed patrols, on foot, in cars, no deliveries of any kind, no visitors allowed, unless you walk them in yourself and collect their photo government ID for the building security team to look at before you even walk them through. These are all, well, not all, but a lot of these are new rules laid upon me and other residents just within this past week. I got in a bit of a tizzy with the property manager. Now, I know a lot of you listeners are thinking, can he ever really get in a fight with someone or get in an argument with someone? I can't see it. He's so timid and such an introvert. I know you're all thinking that, and I am too. So I overcame that. You should be proud of me. I overcame my timidity. Am I saying that correctly? Timidity? Wow. I think I said that correctly. Anyway, I overcame such introverted vices and really sat down with the property manager to discuss these draconian security rules that they have laid out in the building in which I live. And it revealed quite a lot to me, and it reveals a lot about the world overall, and I want to share that with my listeners really quick here. I'm sure some of you were asking, at least I asked, why? Why are you laying out these draconian rules? Well, he said there could be an active shooter disguised as a florist or a delivery man. Let that sink in. Now, I think the property manager has seen Terminator one too many times. So, yes, if Sarah Connor or John Connor currently live here as my neighbors, then we're all in a lot of trouble. Yeah, I agree with that. But in the event they are not my neighbors, this concern to me seems to be a little ridiculous. As I pointed out, this sort of thing could happen anywhere. It happened up the road from where I live at a grocery store, unfortunately. It could happen in a restaurant, it could happen in a coffee shop, it could happen anywhere. At a concert, on the street, but in an apartment building? Sure. I mean, yeah, it could happen anywhere, and I believe that. But why fortify the building to such an extreme to where the residents are basically locked prisoners inside their homes? It is absurd to me. And so I explained this to our intrepid property manager. He agreed that this definitely could happen anywhere. My big issue was that me being disabled and tied to an oxygen tank really can't walk downstairs to intercept every possible delivery or go out and get food every single time or walk in every visitor every single time. In fact, it's impossible for me to do that. He agreed, thankfully. And I also get it to some extent why they laid this out. I know I have some affluent neighbors. There's a lot of rich people where I live. I get it. I get there's a lot of rich people that don't like to get shot. But when it comes down to it, the actual chance of an active shooter coming into this apartment building and shooting up apartments is so minute that, as I told the property manager, I will pay them all my money and eat my hat if a shooter comes ever through that door. Now, a lot of you might be thinking guns are terrible. We should stop shootings. How can you be against this? Yeah, I don't want a shooting in my apartment building, obviously, but I also want deliveries. And I don't think stopping an Instacart delivery, an Uber Eats delivery is going to prevent a shooting, for God's sakes. To me, it is just a step above and beyond what is actually at risk. And that is so indicative of the world today, that we live in such a fear of violence around every corner. And yes, it could happen everywhere. That doesn't mean it will. There's a big difference between something could happen versus something likely will happen. There's a big stretch between those two events. And apparently, that stretch has narrowed so much in the psyche of people in the last few years that they are indistinguishable. And that is what I'm speaking of. Today it seems that this fear of violence is again just as fear of disease, paralyzing, limiting your own life, tearing yourself down, isolating for sure. And it just blows me away how people are more than happy to say, yes, we are more than happy to give up Uber Eats and deliveries of any kind and visitors from my sister or brother or parents or whomever just to feel extra safe at night in that extraordinarily unlikely event that a shooter will walk through that door and open fire upon me in my apartment. Now again, it could happen, of course, but will it? Of course, this also sounds like famous last words. Watch, in the news in the next couple days, surprise shooting in apartment building. God, I shouldn't even laugh about that. But to me, it is just such a severe overreaction to a threat that has just completely collapsed people's ability to thoroughly comprehend threats. When you look at a threat, you don't just look at whether or not a threat is there. Of course, threats are going to be there, and all varying kinds of threats exist everywhere. What matters is your ability to calculate the likelihood of that threat occurring and how soon or how immediate that threat may be. That's how survival is ensured. It's not ensured by buttoning up like a turtle and refusing even Uber Eats deliveries to your neighbors because you're petrified of the slightest little damage that could come to you and harm your little doorknob. Give me a break. This issue infuriated me because I need deliveries to live. I'm on home hospice. My hospice team has to visit me. My medications come to me via mail. My food comes to me via mail. I can't leave the house because I can't, because I would starve of oxygen and collapse and die. And that was something they didn't think of. So, after some time, I talked them into allowing me to get the things I wanted. But still, how indicative this is of how poorly people in our world can distinguish between what is likely and what is unlikely, what could happen, and what may very well indeed happen. Where that bridge is so short, to where people's brains are incapable of deciding how to minimize true risk. Is there also a risk that Godzilla is going to invade the city? Don't say no, there's no risk of that. There's a very low risk of that, I admit that. But hey, you never know. There's a chance. There is a chance a Godzilla-like creature will rise up out of a nuked island in the South Pacific and invade the city. You don't know it's impossible. I don't know it's impossible. I wouldn't call it impossible. But do I stay awake and worry about it? Of course not. Of course not. And the problem is so many people don't know how to draw that line. And in point of fact, I'll share this bit. In my career, I spoke many times to people in Homeland Security and in the FBI where it comes to a national or an NGO group attack, such as a terrorist organization attack. If one of those things were to target you, then all bets are off. There's nothing the government could do in a civilian environment to protect you. They will hit a home run every time. They'll hit the ball out of the park every time, and you are SOL. There's nothing that can be done to save you. If you are targeted by a country or by a powerful NGO, then I'm sorry, but that's all she wrote. There's nothing that can be done to save you in a civilian environment. You better pack what little bag you have and get your butt into a military fortified bunker with 24-hour protection. And even then, your security is far from guaranteed. In the civilian world, despite the best you do, it's absolutely nil. Absolutely nil if that were to happen to you. And that's not coming from me. That's coming from my contacts that I had at the time at the FBI and at the Department of Homeland Security, who said point blank, again, if you're the target, you're SOL. So why live in fear of it? Why live in so much fear of something that is either so unpreventable or something that is so unlikely that we are now applying policies and not even inconveniences, but incredible restrictions on our lives to mitigate the fear of these events, no matter how unlikely they may be, and no matter how unlikely anything you do will be to protect yourself. It's just the way it is. You won't be able to protect yourself anyway. But the good news is, it's very unlikely. It's like worried about the Godzilla attack. Maybe not that extreme, granted. I use that example for fun. But there's a lot of other examples we could all think of together. Say, a commercial airliner landing on top of your house and exploding. That's a high, well, not a high, but that's a much higher possibility than Godzilla attacking. I think we could all agree on that. So why aren't you worried about that every night? Why don't you sleep in the basement? Watch, a few listeners now will go sleep in the basement. But no, you can't prevent everything. You can't prevent every danger. You're perpetually in physical danger every time you get in a motor vehicle. You are in extreme danger. I mean, it's a cliche that motor vehicles kill more people than almost anything else. But we permit it. So I don't see why my building and why other people in my building and around the world, my countrymen, the people in my city, my neighbors, my compadres, so to speak, are permitting such restrictions based on such limited threats. And they carry with them such an inability to measure the likelihood of a threat against them. So, with that being said, I don't understand why people are so afraid of these things. The things that are of real fear, of course you better fear them. If you're, I don't know, on a hike through Chinese-controlled territory into a political dissident province, you should absolutely be concerned about physical danger, especially of just being hit accidentally by active counterinsurgency or insurgency against the Chinese where you're at. That makes perfect sense. But it's not for everything. You can't have every danger equal to every danger, because if you do that, they're all meaningless. Frederick the Great once said, "He who defends everywhere defends nothing." And there's a lot of truth to that. And so for that, I don't understand why there's this fear of violence. Oh my. And finally, in my list of fears here, I'm going to approach the fear of death. And what I mean here is the fear after death, not the fear of it occurring. I kind of understand the fear of a painful or a slow or an otherwise miserable death, but I also don't understand the fear of death once that's all done, so to speak. And I had this conversation just this week with my social worker, of all people. I told her point blank that I really don't fear death at all. That is to say, I don't fear the afterlife. I'm not scared with respect to what's going to happen to me once I die. And she actually turned around and confided in me that she's the opposite. She, working in hospice, mind you, this is a social worker in hospice care. She confided that she is afraid of death. I asked her point blank why. Her answer was the pain. And I said, well, okay, but beyond that, once you're beyond the pain and you're dead, why be afraid of that? And her answer was bizarre. She said, what if there's pain after death? So I thought to myself, well, what if there is pain after death? What if there is? What could I possibly do about it? What could I do to intervene in some sort of afterlife that no one has ever exposed or communicated down to the billions upon billions of humans that are here, and done so in a convincing, broadly speaking way? So if there is pain after death, well, then I guess I'm SOL. There's pain after death is sort of my attitude. I don't see any reason still to fear it. I don't see any reason to fear the unknown. And in this case, I think also the absurd. I think it's kind of silly to fear pain after death. Excuse me. But in that sense, I guess I'm lucky. Because when I look back on my life, I've never, ever, ever in my life feared anything like hell. Now, I even was raised Catholic. I did go to a Catholic school. In point of fact, I went to the same Catholic school as my social worker. How's that for a small, twisted world? Excuse me again. And as I put it, we're both recovering Catholics. And though I guess my difference is I've never, ever been afraid of hell or taken it even remotely seriously. But I know many people do. And that frankly saddens me. Because when I see it, I see hell or after-death philosophy as a control mechanism over people to scare them into doing something that they otherwise would not want to do. It's to fool them. It's to be a charlatan. It's to be a shyster and fool people. The pattern tends to be, do what I say or else. Or else what? Yes, I know that there might be a painful death, but if I fail to do what you say, what's the worst consequence? And when they come back to me with, well, there might be angry men in red pajamas with pitchforks, and they're going to poke you in the behind for eternity, or anything else absurd, I'm just going to look at them in the eye and say, you made that up. Because they did. And otherwise they might say, oh, well, I learned it from someone. Who? A priest. Really? In what context? He told me if I don't do something, this will happen to me. Aha! He's trying to control you. And it just saddens me, excuse me as I stutter here, because I am so flabbergasted that people can be so easily fooled, and so blatantly fooled by what appears to be a stupid lie. Do this or else a giant squirrel will come after you with red glowing eyes and gnaw on your booty until it turns into a shell of a nut, and then he's going to bury it in a tree until next winter, and then he's going to eat it with his family, and you're just going to be nothing but eaten like a nut in a tree. What? I'm making it up as I go along, obviously. And, as I sit down and ponder it, and think about the fear of death that is so rampant in society. Sure, I think a lot of it is religious born. It's born out of religion. A lot of it is not. But in this sense, I side with Marcus Aurelius yet again when it comes to this sort of philosophy. He said, it is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. And I agree with him. To Aurelius, I say, amen, brother. To me, I agree with that. My biggest fear is to never having lived. And so for people to be paralyzed and isolated and to damage their own lives out of this fear is frankly to me depressing. It's saddening because I know these people are not going to live their lives to the ability that they could. And one day, when they find out, sure enough, what happens when we die, because, hey, that's the good news. It's the big mystery, right? But the best news about the big mystery is We're all going to find out one day. And when they find out they've wasted their lives, I pity them. I seriously pity them. Death comes for all of us. So my attitude is, don't worry. You will absolutely find out one day what happens after death. It's a certitude. It's going to happen. You will find out. So why sweat it? Why fear it? And I side again with Marcus Aurelius on this, that the death itself should not be feared, but never having lived. Again, amen to that, brother, because that's exactly where I am in my beliefs. Isolation, paralyzation, self-destruction. All these are the bastard childs of fear itself. Born through fear and set to stop life even before it's lived. This is truly the fear I don't understand and I adamantly refuse to succumb to. I know since my examples here are contemporary and I've run the risk of some controversy. And for those listeners caught up in that or angered by political juxtaposition, I implore you to listen to these points in my fundamental message, which is simple. Don't overcalculate risk to a point where you find your own happiness or your own existence your worst enemy. Paralyzing yourself, unable to do the thing or things you love. Isolating yourself, eliminating human interaction and opportunity for every variation of love. And destroying yourself, frankly, are all the contrary to what should be all our goals, regardless of the risk. Live your life. Do not come to your final scene. And just as the curtain drops, you remember you skipped most of the show for various insurmountable fears. Otherwise, that curtain will not be a gentle goodbye that we all hope for, but rather it will be a crushing final reminder that you did exactly what even the ancients themselves warned against. You failed to live your life. That is outside the opportunity for me. And I just hope for you, my listeners, it's the same way. And with that, I just want to give another thanks for listening to my little podcast. And be sure to follow it and turn on notifications so you don't miss future podcasts. Every app has a different way to do it. I kind of wish I had a guide on how to set up notifications on all the various apps, but anyway, I trust if you made it this far, you can figure it out. And if you want to support the podcast further, I implore you to go to www.patreon.com/mydogwilleeatmyface. I'll of course put the link in the description. But above all, above everything else here, I really do thank you very much for listening to my incessant ranting. That means more to me than any other form of support, and I truly mean my thanks to all of you. So for now, I will say ciao for now, and talk to you again, hopefully later.